Welcome to the Explainer. Today we're unpacking topic 48, English phonological varieties and accent standards. Basically, we're taking a fascinating look right under the hood of English pronunciation. So, picture this. You've spent years studying the rules. You've totally mastered the vocabulary. And then, you finally travel abroad, step off the plane, and wait, the street English you're hearing sounds completely alien. You might even catch yourself thinking, is this actually the same language? It's a completely relatable shock. Well, don't worry. You are definitely not alone here. Researchers Hughes and Trujillo actually hit the nail on the head when they wrote, "People seem to speak faster than expected, and their English differs significantly from what students have learned." So, that feeling of total linguistic bewilderment, it's a documented scientific phenomenon, driven by very real structural variations in how people actually speak. All right, so today we're handing you the decoder ring to finally make sense of global English. Here is our roadmap. We'll cover dialect versus accents, the social accent triangle, how accents actually differ, RP versus General American, regional British varieties, and we'll wrap up with the sound spelling disconnect. Section 1. Dialect versus accent. Now, we honestly tend to use these two words interchangeably, but linguistically speaking, they are totally different beasts. A dialect is all about differences in grammar and vocabulary. Think of someone in East Anglia dropping the S on third-person verbs, saying he come or he do. An accent, though, is strictly about pronunciation and sounds. It's the vowels, the consonants, the rhythm. So the golden rule to remember here is dialects change the rules and the words, but accents only change the sounds. Section 2. The social accent triangle. Think of how geography and class intersect in language like a giant triangle. Right at that narrow apex at the very top, you've got prestige varieties, things like standard English and received pronunciation. These sit way up top and have virtually no regional characteristics. You literally cannot tell where the speaker is from geographically. But look down at that wide base at the bottom. That's where we find broad regional dialects and accents. The further down the social or educational scale you go, the wider and more distinct the geographical variation becomes. And pronunciation features correlate super strongly with social class. Take H-dropping, for example, saying "ello" instead of "hello." Statistically, that's much more frequent in working-class speech compared to upper-middle-class speech. But keep in mind, human beings are incredibly flexible. We code switch. A lot of speakers will use a local accent at home with family and then seamlessly shift their pronunciation closer to that standard apex when they're in a formal or professional setting. Section 3. How accents actually differ. Linguists have essentially boiled down all pronunciation differences into 4 technical categories. Think of these as our ultimate tools for becoming linguistic detectives. We have realizational, phonotactic, systemic, and lexical distributional. I know, they sound like a mouthful, but let's break down a couple of the most impactful ones. First up is a phonotactic difference, which basically refers to the structural environments where certain sounds are even allowed to occur. And the absolute biggest one in the English language, rhoticity. General American is what we call a rhotic accent, meaning speakers pronounce the R in all positions, like in car or hard. Received pronunciation, or RP, is non-rhotic. They drop the R before consonants and at the ends of words, saying ka or had. And what's really wild is that non-rhotic speakers will sometimes add an intrusive R between vowels just to link words together. It results in phrases that sound exactly like put a comma RN. Next, we've got lexical distributional differences. This basically determines which vowel gets used in very specific sets of words. Let's anchor this with a super famous example, the bath split. In Northern England and General American, words like bath and dance use the short a vowel. But head over to Southern England or listen to RP, and they systematically swap that out for the long ah vowel, saying bath and dance. It's a total systematic swap based purely on region. Section 4. RP versus General American. Okay, let's put the 2 heavyweight reference standards head to head. From a strictly phonemic perspective, RP and General American actually use the exact same set of consonant building blocks. But the phonetic realizations, how speakers physically produce those sounds in the mouth, create a totally different vibe. For example, General American uses a darker, more velarized L sound between vowels. Also, think about a T sandwiched between 2 vowels. In American English, that often becomes a voiced tap, making water sound like water, whereas RP keeps that T super crisp and voiceless.
And naturally, this leads to some major individual word differences. Thanks to different historical borrowing patterns and that roticity thing we just talked about, we get these iconic word clashes that we constantly hear in movies and TV. The British RP speaker says Clark for clerk, while the American says clerk. You say tomato, I say tomato. Vase becomes vase, and root often becomes rot. They're highly specific little tweaks, but man, they are incredibly noticeable.
Section 5. Regional British Varieties. Let's zoom in on traditional British dialect regions. The North-South divide in England is absolutely massive. It's primarily defined by the Bath split we covered earlier, but there's also the foot-strut split. In the south of England, words like foot and strut use two completely distinct vowel sounds. But in the north, those vowels merge right together, meaning put and put actually sound exactly identical. Heading further north, we hit Scottish English, which has highly distinct mechanics all its own. Kind of like General American, it is actually rhotic. They really pronounce those R's. But systemically, Scottish English has only one oo phoneme, where most other accents have two. So they lack certain vowel length distinctions compared to RP. They also tend to use single flat vowel sounds, monophthongs, for words like face and goat. Oh, and they frequently preserve this distinct, breathy wh sound, which makes a super clear distinction between which and which. Now let's hop across the sea and contrast those Scottish sounds with Irish English. Irish English is also rhotic, but it features this unique retroflexed R that gives it a really characteristic rolling sound. They also use a very crisp, clear L sound everywhere. And here's the crucial part. Their T and D sounds are usually dental, meaning they're pronounced with the tongue placed right on the teeth. Because of this, the typical thuth sound you'd hear in RP shows up as a plosive in Irish English, making a word like thin sound exactly like tin. Section 6. The sound spelling disconnect. Okay, time to address the elephant in the room. Why on earth does the spelling of English completely betray its actual pronunciation? Well, it all traces back to historical events like the Great Vowel Shift. This shift fundamentally changed how English vowels sounded. But, and here's the kicker, it happened after the printing press had largely locked in how words were spelled. So English spelling was essentially frozen in time, reflecting the medieval history of the words, while the spoken pronunciation just kept right on evolving. And that is exactly what led to the highly irregular, frustrating spelling patterns we deal with today. Which brings us to a final, slightly provocative thought to leave you with. As we've seen today, language is a living, breathing thing. It's constantly shifting across regions and classes. The spoken word simply refuses to stand still. So what you should really take away from this is that pronunciation is always in motion. Think about it. Will the wildly diverse global accents we hear today eventually force a reshaping of how English is actually spelled tomorrow? Or are we just locked into our historical spelling forever? It's definitely a fascinating puzzle to ponder the next time you stumble across a word that sounds absolutely nothing like how it looks. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.